Welcome to Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, we're thrilled to welcome General Jeffrey Buchanan. Lieutenant General Jeff Buchanan retired from active duty in 2019 after serving 37 years in the U.S. Army. He served 4 combat tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He also served in operational deployments on every continent except Antarctica. Jeff led the operational level military response in support of FEMA for 5 major hurricanes: Matthew, Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Florence, and in support of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency for the Southwest Border Security. Upon retirement, he moved back home to Patagonia, Arizona. He serves on the board of directors for the Arizona State Parks and Trails and is a commissioner for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. He and his wife, Laura, have 3 adult children, all married, and 8 grandchildren. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears.
Thanks, Hannah. It's an honor for me to be able to join you today.
Yeah, well, I was looking forward to talking with you. So can you start us off this morning by telling us where your story begins?
Wow. Well, Heidelberg, Germany in 1959. I was an Army brat. My dad, a soldier, a helicopter pilot. This was before aviation was a branch, so he was in the Signal Corps, and he was rated. General Cody told me that my dad was what they used to call a decathlete. He was rated on 10 different aircraft, about 5 rotary wing and 5 fixed wing, but a couple of tours in Vietnam. Prior to that, though, he and my mom, who was a school teacher, had me in Heidelberg, Germany. And then I grew up as an Army brat and moved all around, as you could imagine. Lived more often than not in Arizona. And one of the times my dad was in Vietnam, we lived in a small place on a Native American reservation called the Tona Autumn Reservation, where my mom taught school. And so when I graduated high school in Arizona, I stayed here. My parents were off to Europe and I stayed and went to college. And so that's kind of the start. I grew up with Army values, although we didn't call them the same values necessarily that we call today. That's how I grew up. And it's kind of interesting. Now I have a son that has got 18 years in the Army, 9 combat deployments. And you know, I guess we're an Army family.
I'd say. So what sparked your interest in serving in the military?
I think more than anything, it was just growing up with a certain set of values where service to others was really important, kind of regardless of what you chose to do. And, you know, to that extent, I mentioned I have one son who's in the Army. I've got another son who's a hotshot in the Forest Service, wildland firefighter.
Yeah.
He just got back yesterday from a fire up in Washington State. So this time of year, they're all over the West, fighting fires in the Rockies. And then my daughter, school teacher, has taught at both the high school and college level. And it's always been about, in my family, serving others. I got I applied for an ROTC scholarship out of high school, didn't get it. I spent a lot of time hunting and fishing in high school, so my grades were not what they could have been. But I went to college and got serious, and then got a 3-year ROTC scholarship, and then came in the Army that way. And I decided that, you know, people would ask me even early on, are you in this for a career? I don't know. I mean, I'm going to stay as long as I'm having fun and making a difference. And, you know, that lasted 37 years.
So was there a particular event or person that kind of served as a catalyst for your career? Is there anything that stands out that, you know, was just kind of one of those real kind of defining moments or people for your career?
Sure. You know, I had great mentors all along the way in a lot of different a lot of different organizations and types of units. But I'll describe an event that I think was um, important in forming how I look at the world. I don't know if you've ever heard of the ancient Greek philosophy of Stoicism,
Uh-huh.
but this I try to be a Stoic. I'm not perfect, of course. Um, I do still occasionally get mad, when somebody cuts me off in traffic or things, but I try to let that go. And how I've tried to live my life is learning that you really can't control what happens to you. You can't control what other people do or say, but you can always control yourself and you can always control your attitude. And so the event for me was the PT test to get into Ranger School. And I was kind of at the back of a line, and the first event was push-ups. I had to do 40 push-ups to pass,
Okay.
and I was pretty fit. And the guy counting the push-ups was saying 38, 38, 38, 38. And it was like, well, what am I doing wrong? You're not going down far enough. So I started bouncing my chest off the ground, 38,
Yeah.
38. And so I failed. And I don't think I'd ever failed at anything. And now I'm crushed. And they moved us, of course, off to the side. These are the scumbags who failed the PT test. And if I had an option that I could stay and do PT every day, we actually did PT 2 or 3 times a day for a week and take another test at the end. And if I passed, I was going to be in the next class. One of the guys that failed was a sergeant first class, and he was a medical platoon sergeant out of 2nd Ranger Battalion. And he was a special forces medic, had been in 1st SOG in Vietnam. Now that it's declassified, I can even talk about what he was. He was in a unit called Detachment Alpha in Berlin, which was hyper secret at the time. But now, like I said, it's been declassified. Wonderful guy, extremely fit. And he failed. And he failed for sit-ups, I think. Anyway, his attitude was, I failed. Okay, cool. What's next? And for me to follow that guy's example and learn from him about how important it is to have a positive attitude, no matter what happens to you, and how that can get you through a lot, that changed my outlook on a lot of things.
Yeah.
To include, staying at Ranger School for that extra week and then doing all that PT and taking a test, which I passed with flying colors at the end of it. It was fine. But that really helped me and helped me with mindset. What I found is, later on in life, much later on in life, I was a general court martial convening authority for a number of years. And I dealt with a lot of dominantly officers. I reserved, the right to deal for Article 15s or memorandums of reprimand for officers who had misbehaved over the years. And I only did this, I guess, as a major general or a lieutenant general. But something I always said to him is before I decided what I was going to do is, look, you can't go back and change what happened. You can't control what I am going to do right now. But you can always control your attitude. And the quality of the next 5 or 10 years of your life is going to be driven by what your attitude is. So anyway, that was a lesson I learned from failing the entry PT test, getting into Ranger School.
That sounds like a good lesson to learn. So I know every journey, has its hurdles. What are some of the biggest, obstacles that you faced in your career, and then how did you overcome them? I know it was a great example on the PT test. Do you have any other kind of insights with, when folks face, obstacles that they just either don't feel equipped or don't feel like they have enough, experience to tackle, kind of what your advice would be with that?
Yeah. So the one that comes to mind is you're going to have subordinates, no matter what line of work you're in. As a leader, you're going to have subordinates who are going to have a crushing event, a life-changing event. It might be a death of a parent or a death of a child or a divorce or something, death of a spouse. And what I have learned is that um, you, as a leader, rarely know what to say. You don't know what to say. And honestly, there really is nothing you can say to make a whole lot of difference. But there's always something you can do. And what you can do is go there and be there for them. Um, I, I one night lost three soldiers in a incident in Iraq, and it was Christmas Eve, as a matter of fact. And I knew that there was probably nothing I could say to help that platoon who was grieving their loss, but I could at least go there and spend time with them and say, look, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. I have a friend who is a Gold Star mom, and she was an avid runner. She had her best friend was a running partner. The two of them would run 3, 4, 5 days a week. She lived in Colorado. And when her son was killed, her friend completely avoided her. Didn't talk to her, wouldn't talk to her because she was uncomfortable, didn't know what to say. And that was exactly the wrong response. Even if you don't know what to say, just go there and say, I don't know what to say. But the fact that you're there makes a huge difference. And all of us, no matter what our line of work is, we're gonna have people who work for us who experience a traumatic loss of some sort. And the most important thing you can do, that becomes your most important event of the day. Whatever it is, go there and be there with them.
That's great insight. So I know you've commanded, during both combat and, humanitarian crises, natural disasters. What advice do you have for leaders who are operating in high stakes, chaotic environments, lots of uncertainty, extreme gray zone situations? What advice do you have for folks who find themselves kind of in the hot seat in those types of environments?
I guess one statement, I'll say a statement and I'll tell a story that kind of reinforces it. The statement is define the problem before you try to solve it. So here's the story. I had just come off of leading the military effort in response to both Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. And initially another organization was leading the effort. It was a maritime outfit. They were leading the effort to the response to Puerto Rico. Those three storms all happened right on top of each other. And so these guys were down there, but it was honestly, our response was going to have to be land domain focused. I was the land domain commander, and it was way too big for how this unit was formed. It was fine for small level responses, but this was going to require a major effort. So anyway, I think 6 days after landfall, I was actually, this is Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. I was in California with the state working on an earthquake exercise, and I got a phone call from my boss and in Northcom. And this is General Lori Robinson, Air Force 4-star. Her deputy was an Army guy named Reynold Hoover, who's now leading the U.S. Olympics or the 2028 Olympics in L.A. Anyway, 7 words for me: go to Puerto Rico and fix it. Okay. So, in the military, we're used to getting this nice op order with all kinds of specified and implied tasks and everything else. There's none of that, right? And in a crisis, there rarely is going to be any of that. You're not going to get good orders. You're not going to get specified tasks. You're going to get something broad and undefined, like go to Puerto Rico and fix it. And I really, really appreciated the confidence that Lori Robinson had in me and the trust that she gave me to figure that out without trying to nickel and dime me. But at the same time, well, I grabbed my stuff. arranged for a flight back to Texas so I could get a bag and a small team and then fly onward to Puerto Rico. That whole time I'm thinking about fix what? What
Yeah.
is it we're trying to fix? So for the entire flight, which ended up taking about series of flights, about 36 hours. Remember, all the airports were shut in Puerto Rico
Wow.
too. So I had to go and get on a C-130, which I could land, with military air.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that happened, but that whole time, myself and my small team are trying to figure out, okay, what's the core problem, or what are the core problems here?
Yeah.
And without getting into detail I know we don't have time for me to go on about how we figured out what the core problems were, but why was Maria in Puerto Rico different than Harvey in Texas or Irma in
Yeah.
Florida? Um, Once we had that, we could use that to shape our response and what it
Mhm.
was. And the key thing is, those problems change over time. I'll just give you an example. I think we ended up delivering, all of the people in the interior side of the island were completely cut off. No roads
Mhm.
were open, everything. So we had to get them, and you couldn't even know what they needed because there was no cell phone towers up, no telephone lines. You had to go there and find out. So we flew helicopters and went in and checked on people. We always delivered water and food, medical supplies. But one of the key things, one of the most important things was water. Give
Mhm.
people fresh bottled water because all the water plants were shut down because there's no electricity. And I think we ended up delivering something like 46 million liters of bottled water. And we did this, for a period of weeks. Um, but your core problems change over time.
Mhm.
And what happened was eventually we got power up to these water plants. We started delivering water but people had a real taste for bottled water. They wanted that bottled water rather than what they were getting out of the faucet. And it was free. And that sounds great
Mhm.
unless you're a grocery store owner.
Yeah.
And part of the way you make a living is to sell bottled water. And if we kept giving out free bottled water, we were going to actually get in the way of
Mhm.
recovery. So it's one thing to do it while you're saving lives, but at some point in time, that's going to transition. So the
Yeah.
problem changes and your action actually changes the problem. But before you jump into trying to fix it, you got to understand what is the problem? What is it that I'm actually trying to fix? Einstein was once asked, if you had an hour to save the world, what would you do? And he said, well, I'd spend the first 55 minutes studying the problem and the last 5 minutes solving it. So even in a crisis, you have to figure out how you're going to spend enough time and energy to understand what it is you're actually trying to fix. Because if you don't, you may end up creating many more problems than you actually solve.
Mhm. That's such a powerful story. Kind of how the solution became or create more problems. I would have never thought that about bottled water, but what a powerful illustration. So I know back, January 2021, the U.S. House of Representatives, they asked you to analyze, leadership, security failures surrounding the Jan 6 Capitol breach. And I know that's an event that most folks listening can remember occurring. Can you share anything, any insights from that experience, any lessons learned, any kind of takeaways that you had, being kind of called up for this, very important kind of mission, and something that hadn't happened before, certainly not in our lifetime, and then kind of what you walked away with that.
Yeah. Um, we ended up, first of all, it wasn't just me, myself. There was a team of about 7 of us.
Mhm.
Our leader was Russ Honore, and I was effectively Russ's deputy
Okay.
for this thing. But we all had our own particular areas of expertise. And I was focused on a lot of the security end and the operations end,
Mhm.
if you will. But we had a number of experts from both civilian and military walks of life that were part of this. What we did, we tried not to look back on the 6th of January and figure out the details of what happened and why. We had to certainly learn some of that and understand
Yeah.
some of it, but it wasn't about looking backward. It was more about looking forward. Okay, what are the gaps we have in our series of systems here? Whether it was physical security of the Capitol
Mhm.
or security of representatives and senators as they travel from DC to their home state.
Mhm.
What are the threats? I mean, what are the threats in the cyber world, the land domain,
Mhm.
the air domain?
Yeah.
We looked at everything. We developed a comprehensive report with, God, I think it was something like 120 pages with 180 different recommendations. There were a couple of recommendations that we did not put in our report because we felt that the report was going to get released at
Mhm.
some point in time. And there were a couple of real concerns we had about threats.
Yeah.
We briefed leaders from both political parties in person, and certainly the sergeants of arms of both the House of
Mhm.
Representatives and the Senate. There was a couple of gaps in security that we didn't want anybody to know about,
Right.
if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Um, I hope they acted on them.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they did, but they did. Here's one thing I found. Um, when we laid out uh, all of our observations and recommendations to members of both political parties, they all participated. There was a lot of give and take. There wasn't a lot of finger pointing.
Mhm.
And the perspective seemed to be security is apolitical. That was
Yeah.
helpful for me because I'm nonpartisan. I'm adamantly nonpartisan.
Yeah.
Um, I always vote a mixed ticket.
Mhm.
Um, you know, um, but to see members of both political parties come together in that closed environment was helpful. The disappointing part was as soon as the cameras were on and they were back,
Oh,
transmitting, they
yeah.
can't help but poke each other in the eye. So it's
Mhm.
disappointing, but at least in private,
Mhm.
they could see that they needed to sort work together, and they did adopt many of our recommendations in a I wouldn't say bipartisan, I'd call it more in a nonpartisan way.
Yeah.
Security shouldn't be a political thing.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, our observations were everything from the physical structure down to the training of the Capitol Police
Mhm.
and relationships, and what goes on at the interagency level. So again, we were there for something like 6 or 7 weeks putting all this together, and
Yeah.
but it was helpful. I hope that we help them better secure themselves for the future.
So you've spoken about leadership, in the gray zone where, right and wrong may not be, immediately clear. How do you coach leaders to navigate these complex situations?
Um, I one of the things that I talk to people about is try to surround themselves with a team of people who doesn't think and act exactly like them. Now it starts with, in order to be successful, you have to start with the spirit of humility.
Mhm.
And um, this is counterintuitive. A lot of people think, well, you need to be confident as a leader. Well, you can be confident. You can be confident and humble at the same time.
Mhm.
And part of it is they don't understand what humility really means. And I think Maya Angelou said it best. And the problem is they confuse humility with modesty. But I
Mhm.
think Maya Angelou said it best. She said, you don't want modesty, you want humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Mhm.
So, in other words, a truly humble leader will not come into a situation assuming that he or she has all the answers and is the smartest person in the room, but you'll be open to ideas from others. And if you intentionally surround yourself with people who come from different walks of life, I'll use the diversity term, and people are in the current world are getting offended by it, but I want to talk about it in maybe a different way.
Mhm.
Part of the problem with how a lot of people look at diversity is they look at diversity as an end, and that is a problem. I think you need to look at diversity as a means. So, and how do you define diversity? Well, we have all our typical, you know, um, different factors for diversity, race, ethnicity, religion, uh, gender, sexual orientation. All those things are markers of diversity, if you will. Well, if you look at diversity as an end, you have a decision up front. Hey, I need X number of people who look like fill in the blank, or Y number of people. That's, from my perspective, that's a wrong attitude. Instead, look at it yourself and say, if I surround myself, if this is me, if I surround myself with a bunch of 66-year-old white male infantry officers, I'm going to get a limited perspective because we tend to think in similar ways. In the joint world, that I went way out of my way to bring in key leaders from the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard when they were working under me, or interagency, or people from different countries. That's just the uniforms. I'll tell you one thing that is underlooked a lot of times with respect to diversity is age. The last thing I wanted is a bunch of baby boomers around me, especially if we're talking about how do we leverage social media. Hey, I wanted somebody who grew up with an iPhone in their hand, because they're far more instinctive about this stuff. And so I think a humble leader, again, starts with a spirit of humility. Don't assume that you have the best ideas and are the smartest person and know everything. You surround yourself with people who don't think and act exactly like you do, a diverse group around you, and then you can be open to their ideas. You're going to get a lot more options and probably better options than if you're just limited by what's inside your own cranium. And now, in the end, as a leader, you're still going to have to make the decision and you're still going to have to own it. But I found that I made better decisions when I had more options, and those options started with a diverse group of people that I was willing to listen to. And so, but leader behavior wise, I can't come into that group and say, well, here's what I think. What do you guys think? Because then I've just shut them down. I have to start with, what do you guys think? Hear what they have to say. And then I say, okay, given all that, here's what I think, or here's what we're going to do.
I like that. That's a good perspective, kind of starting it out. It seems small, but it makes a world of difference how you open that up. So I recently read an article that you'd written, and I love this title. It was "Never Get Treed by a Chihuahua, Prioritizing What's Important." And that has created this visual for me. It's been an area that I've been working on, thinking a lot about over the past few months. So not being treated by chihuahuas, now that pops in my head when I'm starting to feel that way. I know in the article you talked about kind of the importance of prioritizing on the right things. How did that article, that lesson, how did that, shape your approach to decision making?
So one of the core ideas is understanding the difference between urgent things and important things. And there's this great tool, and it was originally called the Eisenhower Decision Matrix, and you can see this online. I think it's been copied and refigured a couple of times. I think it was in Stephen Covey's book.
Yeah.
But the idea is the big idea is being something that is not urgent and being important are not the same thing. Urgency is really related to time. Importancy is related to the quality or criticality of the decision. Sometimes you have things that are both urgent and important, but a lot of times you have things that are important, but they're not urgent. And a fault that a lot of leaders make is they don't carve out time to work on the important things. They're focused only on the urgent things. And just a good example, strategic or long range planning. That arguably, that's one of the most important things a leader can do. Everybody is in here in the knife fight. And what they need to do periodically is lift their head up and look, see what's coming much farther away or farther in the future and deal with some of that on the important side. So that to me is one of the key things. And if you look at that tool, the Eisenhower Decision Matrix, you will learn, and if you put it to use, that is, not just look at the tool, you actually have to try to live by it. But you'll find that a lot of the things that you deal with that are urgent tasks are not really important. And, and you can delegate them, or you can just throw them in the trash can because it's just not going to make much of a difference. Instead, try to focus on the things that are important.
So what are your top concerns, about national security? It's a topic lots of people bring up, but I was curious kind of what is it that you're tracking on with national security? What worries you, or what are you kind of paying, what's kind of on your radar with that?
I will stray onto the edge of politics here, and I don't really want to because, again, I try very hard to be nonpartisan. But this administration has done a number of things that I agree with and a number of things that cause me to have a lot of concern. So, we can get into border security if you want and immigration. I mean, in addition to all that time commanding troops on the border, I'm still engaged. In fact, one of my volunteer jobs, I'm a ranch liaison for our sheriff. I patrol the mountains on foot, on horseback, and in a vehicle. And I live only 13 miles from the Mexican border. So I deal with this issue, and my ranch is right here. So I deal with this issue a lot. But more broadly, I was concerned by one thing that seems to be less of a concern than when they first came on. And that was this notion that we could go it alone. We don't need allies. We should, at its extreme, we should break apart NATO and appease Russia. I think that this national security team, which was largely inexperienced, is starting to get some more experience and understanding of the world. And my instinct is, that they're going to make rational decisions with respect to that. And a lot of that comes out of the Ukraine versus Russia deal. But there's a bigger part with NATO and our relationship with NATO countries. I was really concerned about that. And now I think my concerns have eased. I'll tell you one thing that concerns me more than anything with respect to national security is the perception that the military is politicized. Now, I don't even want to address why things are done or whether or not they were intended to be political. Whether it comes to firing a lot of senior leaders without explaining it, holding political rallies at military bases, and now domestic deployment of troops all over the place. Look, I commanded a lot of troops in the homeland, so this is not something completely new. But when you add up the potential perceptions of all of those things, they lead a rational person to believe that the military is becoming increasingly politicized. So instead of just our generals, you have Biden's generals and Trump's generals. And, if you look back over the last 40 years, Gallup poll, talking to Americans who do you have the most confidence in
Mhm.
as an institution, the military has always been at or near the top of the list.
Mhm.
I think that's at threat. If the military is perceived as being a political tool,
Mhm.
again, whether or not they actually are, but if
Yeah.
that's what the perception is, it's going to lead to a lack of confidence, and it's going to lead to a fundamental change in how the American people view their military,
Mhm.
whether or not it's even their military.
Mhm.
And so, and this effect could far outlast the length of time this administration's in power. So that's with respect to national security. That's frankly, it's more of an internal view and public perception, but that's my current biggest concern.
That's very, very enlightening. I think that gives folks something to chew on. So I know, in today's world, it's tempting for young professionals to, be eager for a leadership role or a position, but then, that they want the title, but they're hesitant about, the responsibility that comes with it. And when I think of your career just across, multiple spans, multiple sectors, the big thing that stands out to me is in addition to other things, but especially just heavy responsibility. I mean, you're there on the front lines of some really make it or break it moments for our country. What advice do you have for folks who are avoiding responsibility or hesitant to take roles that, have that increased responsibility?
Mhm. Um, Rarely, so let me say this, rarely did I, in all those years,
Mhm.
rarely did I ever have a job when I thought I had the job figured out the day I took command. You know, I had a lot to learn in every job I went to. And as I think if you accept, you're you're not going to be, if you take a new role as a CEO in some company, you're not going to be as nearly as knowledgeable as the guy who just retired or was fired or whatever the case
Yeah.
may be. Um, but if you have the right spirit, which is I'm going to try to learn every
Mhm.
day and get better and better, and you have confidence in, first of all, your just basic judgment and the values you live with. And then secondly, your ability to surround yourselves with a good team that will help give you good options, then you'll make good decisions.
Mhm.
And you can have confidence that that's going to be, that all is going to be okay. So just because you don't feel like you're the expert in an area should not be a reason to avoid it. The point really is you're not going to be the expert on day one.
Mhm.
Probably you're going to be most expert the day you leave, if you have the right attitude along the way. Um, Now, the one thing I would say, and this has to do with what do you choose to do and how, I mean, I used to give career advice a lot to
Mhm.
people. I do it outside the military as much or even more so than inside nowadays. But
Yeah.
I always try to tell people follow your heart.
Mhm.
Do what you believe it is that you really want to do. And,
Mhm.
that could be informed by taking a position in a new place. You want to be closer to your parents, or, you're going to decide to stay where you're at because your kid's in high school and he's a star on the football team,
Mhm.
or whatever. Um, but follow your heart. Be careful of getting in a trap of, I want to be X.
Mhm.
And in order to be X, I've got to follow this narrow path that causes me to do something I don't really want to do, but that's the step I have to take in order to get
Mhm.
to be whatever. Well, what happens if you don't get selected? Now
Mhm.
you've chosen something you didn't really want to do, in order to have a reward that hasn't come.
Mhm.
And so I think it's far more important to just do the things that make you happy, follow your heart, do for whatever reason, and be happy and be satisfied and do the best job you possibly can, whatever it is you're doing.
Mm. Good words of wisdom there. So what do you think our society, today, the modern world, what are we lacking when it comes to things like leadership, values or resilience? What's something that you see as kind of, a gap that you think, folks could, kind of strengthen or work towards?
Wow, that's a big question.
That's a big one.
So I'll say one thing, and it's interesting if, I'm not an expert on different generational attitudes.
Yeah.
The baby boomers think this,
Yeah.
Gen X thinks that. Here's what, Gen Y or millennials, on and on. I'm not an expert there. But one thing that I think would be helpful for all of us to do is get back towards this service of the important, or this idea of the importance of serving others. Um, I've never been a believer that we should have a draft, but I've always been a believer we should have some sort of form of national service. In the 1990s, I was spending a lot of time in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia doing POW MIA work. It's interesting now because 30 years later, my son is doing the same job that I did, essentially 30 years ago. The organization has changed a lot, but some of the same people are there, believe it or not.
Wow.
And he's a lieutenant colonel now, as I was back then. But one of my observations when I saw people in the mountains in Laos, and I thought, man, these people, it was, at least in those days, it was straight out of National Geographic. These tribes way up in the mountains, no roads, no vehicles, let alone helicopters. I remember, and these people have nothing, but they're happy. I remember thinking, if I could take every 14-year-old in America and bring them over here and see this and learn from it, they would get a broader perspective of the world and be much more thankful for the opportunities that they have. And so I'm not suggesting we need to do that. But if we can somehow inculcate this criticality of serving others, some of them will get the opportunity to go abroad and be in the Peace Corps or whatever, just to see more of the world and understand that there's more out there and we have a lot of opportunities. Let's take advantage of what we have to make ourselves better.
Yeah, it provides a powerful perspective.
Yeah.
So do you have any final words or kind of closing thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience today?
Well, I think we in our country right now are going through a lot of turmoil. We're going through a lot of turbulent times. And I think that one of the problems is we are becoming increasingly segregated into different groups. If you identify as a Swedish American or an Italian American, that's one thing, but you shouldn't concentrate on the Swedish or the Italian part. You should concentrate on the American part. What brings us together? We're going to all have different perspectives. But if, I had breakfast not long ago with a couple of friends here in this little teeny town. I live a couple of miles outside of a town that has 800 whole people in it. No stoplights. We got to drive 30 miles to the nearest grocery store. I mean, it's way out. I love it, by the way, but it is not in the hub of urban America by any stretch of imagination. And these two friends, they're both great friends, but one is way on the left and the other one is way on the right. And I think I think they're both 83 years old. We had breakfast the other day. Or maybe I'll call it brunch. But we got together, and the two of them, they couldn't, when it comes to politics, if one said apples, the other one would say oranges.
Mhm.
There was just no way they
Mhm.
were going to agree on things.
Mhm.
But they could listen to each other and
Yeah.
respect each other and have a thoughtful discussion. And in the end, they left us as good of friends as they were coming in, because that didn't define,
Mhm.
how they looked at people. And so we have a country full of people from a lot of different perspectives.
Mhm.
Um, I think we need to learn from each other, but we need to focus on how do we stay united? We don't need to divide ourselves. We don't need to respond to politicians who try to divide us.
Mhm.
Let's figure out, how are we going to work together, and how are we going to continue to be the United States of America? Anyway, that's it.
Well, thank you so much, General Buchanan, for taking the time, sharing your insights and your experiences today. Your contributions to our nation and continue to impact so many, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Great. Well, thanks, Hannah. It was a pleasure to join you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think about the future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.